Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you all here on such a beautiful Melbourne afternoon. It's rather chilly in Hobart, so we are enjoying this bit of sunshine as it comes through the clouds. We begin today by acknowledging the Yalkut Weelam clan from the Boonwurrung people, traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered today, and pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. Thank you. As you're probably aware, it's Men's Health Week. It starts, if today is Monday, which I think it is, it starts today and goes for the week. And the theme this year is about creating supportive environments for men and boys. The focus is on creating physical, mentally and emotionally healthy environments at home, the workplace and in social settings. And for us, that's what we thought that this exhibit would fit in beautifully with that theme. But before I talk about it, I just wanted to just share some, while I've been here, I've been looking at this incredible building and it's had a very interesting connection with men. It was originally a Masonic hall and from there it passed on to being owned by the Tri Society, which was established in 1883. And what they did was set up in the suburbs around Melbourne programs to lead boys away from the path that led to larrikinism. So I think that's rather interesting, larrikinism. And I think when we guys get together up in the bush, there is a bit of larrikinism. So I think it continues through. But yesterday I looked up at the building and saw this amazing kangaroo and the emu at the top, and there was a Latin inscription. And I thought, well, I wonder what that means. So I looked it up, and I don't know Latin, but I'll pronounce it in the way I'm going to pronounce it. Audi vide tasse. And that means hear, see, and hold your tongue if in peace you would live on. Which is rather interesting, isn't it? Because in this exhibition, we are asking you to hear, to see, and not hold your tongue. We're asking you to write comments, we're asking you to spread the word, and we're asking you to talk to each other about how these photos might move you. Paul Hoelen's an amazing photographer. I think when I look around these photos, for me, they're very personal because I've been to these gatherings, but there's an artistry in what Paul does, and there's also an amazing social commentary. So he combines both those things, which I think is really special and is really helping us get that message out to the world. So I would like to hand over to the Grand Master of Photography from New Zealand and the Master of Photography from Australia. Paul Hoelen, would you please welcome him?
Afternoon, everyone. Hour and a half. I'm not going to stand up. I'm going to take a seat, which would be nice. Huge thank you to Paul Dodd and Sally and Mark, the president of the club here, for having us. I think it's one of the more unique and special exhibition spaces in Melbourne, actually. And just walking into this room, it really struck me just how beautifully intimate and well held the space is, and how appropriate it is given the history of this building as well, in terms of its relationship with men and boys and the work that's happened through and around the space. And the huge work. There's not many camera clubs anywhere I know in the world that own their own building. So not only have they been offering the space for us to exhibit, we've actually been storing it here for like 3 months, which was crucial for us to actually be able to run this exhibition. So this is our first foray for Men with Heart into the national realm. It has been exhibited in Tasmania for 3 years, and we've had upwards of 10,000 people through the exhibition, and born through a beautiful arts grant and a big journey. So today I was kind of going to take you for a bit of a wander through. I think a lot of what I'll speak to will be quite amenable to a lot of you that are photographers in the room, very experienced photographers. What it's like to kind of take on such a big long-term 20-year in the making documentary project. What it's like as an artist to sort of be involved in something that's bigger than you. Actually, it's been quite a big journey for me personally, because this is way bigger than me. I'm only part of the cog in a wheel of a wonderful community. And that's where this project is kind of unique and a little bit special as well. So by the end, I'll probably sort of speak through, and this time mainly because it's being recorded and the interactive question process might get a little bit lost in the recording. So, but at the end, I'm here till four-ish or longer if you want, before I run off back to Tassie and freeze my little cushions off. And catch up on the once in a 17-year swell that hit yesterday, which my phone got hit by all day, but how good the surf was. But men with heart. Very simple 3 words, and I'm still exploring even now, years later, what that means. It's a realm that I feel is a little bit mysterious and quite powerful, and where I feel like I hope this exhibition encourages all people, not just men, to start exploring the realm of the heart. And that's where a body of work like this and the work that a community of men like this really has a position to make a difference. There are 9 men a day taking their lives in Australia. And that's 3 or 4 times more than women. And that's scary. And a lot of people actually don't even know that. And that's not a statistic that's bandied around a lot. And as much as it's kind of a confrontational way to begin a conversation like this, it amplifies and maybe exemplifies the importance of where a body of work like this can have a role in reshaping something like that and bringing awareness and empowerment and processes into why and how we can shift the goings on in that regard. And not being an absolute expert, but spending a lot of time reflecting on it, I think part of the reason that happens is because a lot of men have not had the opportunity or the modeling or the understanding or the support and how to explore the realm of the heart. And that's where I have had the personal privilege to have 20 years of this just flowing through my life. And I cannot tell you what that's meant to me as a man and as a person. So I arrived in Tasmania, 1998, 99. I'd never even heard of the place, and off to see the world, and didn't know what I was doing, and didn't know what I was doing with my life, and I was young, and what I was very present to, and where that kind of lostness came from a little bit is I had no men in my life. Not of significance. My father died when I was 17. I had no brothers. My grandfathers had gone before I was born, so effectively had no grandfathers. I had a couple of uncles, but I only met one of them once in 20 years, and they were on the other side of the world, and they're all gone now. And I was raised with sisters of my mum. So here I was, this young man, like, well, what is it? I'm on my own now, like I'm in a different country, I'm starting a new life. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a healthy man? How do I find out? I don't have people to talk to or somebody to guide the way. Do I look at TV? Do I watch movies? Do I read books? Like, how do you figure that out? And luckily for me, the models that I did have, especially my father, was a wonderful one. So I had a lodestone or a position of reference in my life that was really positive and anchored. So the greatest gift I feel like you can give your children is a wonderful value system and a moral compass to model by. I don't think there's any greater gift you can pass on. And I've learned that a lot. Also in terms of impacting other people in your life, that's paramount. You can till the cows come home, but if you're not walking your talk, then it kind of shifts out the back door a little. It doesn't impact people the same. I've also learned that if you're presenting yourself as a person to anyone and with the intention of touching or reaching someone, it's the level of authenticity and heartfulness that you engage in that conversation that will touch people more than the content of what you're even talking about, really. So we'll see where today goes. Like the way I've presented this in different ways at different times, and different things come out. So I've got some wonderful people in the audience that have seen aspects of this before. So hopefully there'll be forays into areas that you haven't seen, and I'm particularly excited for the opportunity that the Melbourne Camera Club here have given us to reach a wider audience and have this accessible to people all around the world. So I'll push the magic button and move forward. So I'm actually going to start with photographs, and I'm just going to take you through a series of photographs, and what you'll find, I'm kind of in a slightly unique position in that I know the story behind every photograph. So there's the power. Ultimately, a great photographer has the power to let an image stand alone and speak for itself. But you don't always get the beautiful opportunity for the artist himself to reach behind that image. What was before that moment? What was the intention of taking it? What does it represent to you? And hopefully, this little foray into what I think is some of the more significant images in the body of work, which is actually filtered down from 25,000 images taken over 20 years, to just speak to that. So one of the first things we came to is, well, what is a single image that sums up this exhibition? Do we have a cover shot? Do we have something we want to reference to what speaks collectively? And that's quite a tricky thing to do for any sort of large project, I think. And personally, this is the one I was drawn to. And what I see there, firstly, is there's an accessibility. It could be any man. It doesn't matter what walk of life they're in, whether they've got money, whether they're a lawyer, whether they've got a big house. Like, there's a sense of camaraderie. There's a sense of gentle but real intimacy. There's a sense of an authentic moment being there. And they're walking forward in a natural place, but what are they carrying behind them? What are they carrying with them? Their shadow. What do we all carry with us? We carry our shadow. The parts of us we hide away, that we're maybe a little bit ashamed of, we're not proud of, that we don't understand, or that are afraid to explore. And where this particular body of work and where it's created from is all about opening up safe, authentic, held, facilitated space for us to dance in those realms as well. They are welcome as well. And in our regular lives, that's often not the case. And so you'll get a sense as we move through the body of work and a bigger picture of how this men's work has evolved, how that's kind of real and present. And, you know, what's wrapped up in that shadow from a social commentary point of view is things like the Me Too movement and toxic masculinity, the elements of masculinity that are dark, that are scary, that are potentially damaging. And here we are with a group of men that are actually providing, and a body of work that's providing a counterbalance to that conversation. It's important that men are held into account for what the dark things that they're capable of. It is, and that's a good thing that that's happening. But I'm also conscious of what we're left with if that's what's in the forefront of the media and the conversation about men. Because if we're left with a mistrust of men, we all lose. And so having a body of work that speaks to the counterbalance to that, well, here are men that are listening, that are doing the work, that are taking responsibility, that are being accountable for what we're capable of. And let's find a way to empower each other to grow and evolve and move beyond. And I've had a lot of wonderful messages from women in particular that have been deeply moved by this body of work because it's given them hope. They're listening. There are men doing the work. There is possibility for us to move forward and evolve from a societal level and address some of these issues that are quite tricky and difficult and tucked away in the shadows a lot of the time. So that's where this image personally speaks to me. I got voted out for the cover shot, as it were, but that's where I was coming from, because the symbolism of it in particular I felt very powerful and quite holistic and comprehensive in terms of wrapping up a lot of what I feel like this men's work means to me. And it means a lot to me that I've got someone like Doug in the back here who's been doing this work longer than me, who's nodding his head. So this image actually isn't here in the exhibition, partly because it's actually about this big and we couldn't quite get it in the box, shall we see. And so there's a huge conversation about this image that brings me into this work. So here I am asking all these men to offer really intimate, vulnerable windows into their lives and their relationships and moments that have happened for them. And I felt like, as an image maker or as someone who's involved in this project, it's very, very appropriate for me to offer the same, offer a level of intimacy in my own world, in my own life. And it was a wonderful woman who took this photograph, who does exceptional work in the realm of women, funny enough. So if I think about what that image means to me, this is a man who I met in my very, very first men's gathering when I knew nothing about it in 2001. And since that time, he's been my closest brother and my best friend. And he still is today, as some of our audiences just met very recently and spent some time with. So where are we? What's going on in this sort of context? Well, we're deep out in the Tarkine rainforest, which both my friend Davis and I have spent the last 20 years of our life fighting for and putting huge parts of our lives and well-being and daily practice into being the voice for. So the context of this image for me personally is really powerful. And what I love about it is it offers this beautiful, intimate, genuine moment between two men that is just beautifully exquisite for its existence. And I think where photography can serve a really powerful role, there's a level of unconscious and inherent permission that then gives other people to fall into that intimacy and allow that to happen in their lives. And it was interesting at our men's circle last night that we were surrounded by these images and all the power and the collective kind of influence that they gave us in that moment, reflecting off all this permission, as it were, you know, or maybe it's not so weird to do that. Maybe it's okay. Wouldn't that be beautiful? I had that with so-and-so, you know, and there's a naturalness and a grace to this image, I think, that transcends stigma. Particularly around intimacy between men. And I feel like I'm a Kiwi man and I'm an Australian citizen now, but I was quite shocked when I first came here. You know, you think Aussies, Kiwis, sorry, they're all the same. I didn't find that so much. I actually found quite a significant difference when I arrived in Australia between the way men interacted. And I really loved the humility and the humour that is a big part of the dynamic I found between men. But I also felt like there was quite an edgy harshness to the humour. There was a lot of ribbing and putting men down and I was like, I appreciated the bouncy kind of elbow bouncing camaraderie of that, but I also felt the pushing away from a heart space that was. It's like, yeah, I'll get to here, but yeah, no, that's as close as you're going to get, mate. And I'm going to use this humour to keep the conversation at arm's length away from my intimate world. And I appreciate that, and I love it, and I fall into it too. But I felt that distancing, actually. And I feel like an image like this, it moves beyond that. It's, you know, it's Aussie bush. It's a couple of guys smelly and stinky out doing what they love in a wild place, and there's this incredible intimacy there in the moment that moves beyond. So you know, a bit of it strangely, but kind of awesomely. That's the first exhibition. That was like the first thing you saw when you came into place, front and center. And again, it was offering my intimate world as well. Adam was in here yesterday. I haven't seen him for quite a while. And this moment was completely found. It was totally unplanned. And I just basically shot it with a long lens through a bush. And that second, he just connected with me in that moment. So I'll speak to a little bit more about the context around what a gathering is. But it's essentially, most of these images are taken in Tasmania. And a wild, remote place. Most of them actually a place called Wanamana. And if you break that down, isn't that interesting? The most central place in Tasmania, no phones, no mobile coverage, beautiful natural environments. And there's a gorgeous kind of river system that runs through. In fact, the town's actually an old hydro town. And Adam had been through a lot in that gathering, a lot of ups and downs, and he'd been challenged and gone through a lot, and he was just actually at the end of one, he was preparing to go home, and he was like, you know what, I'm not ready. I've got to go wash all this off. I've got to kind of integrate all the things I've been through before I'm ready to sort of move back into the world and meet my family and take my role back in my daily kind of life. And what I feel is significant about an image like this is there's so many avenues you can approach the emotional narrative in this image. The cords in his neck, you know, the raw physicality and masculinity that's present in his body. Could that stare be one of anger? Could it be one of pain? Could it be one of grief? Could it be one of determination? Could it be one of empowerment? It could be all of those things. And having been witness to what he's going through, it was all of those things to me. And I witnessed, you know, a big journey around that of him going through all those things. What about the symbolism of the water? The cleansing, the letting go, the rebirth, the immersion, the coming forward, the rising above, and there's a beautiful symbolism around that speaks beyond even what I intended myself in that found moment. So yeah, I feel like that's one of the more powerful kind of directly engaging aspects of it. And there's also, there's that dark and light conversation. There's dark all around, deep shadows, but there's also a lightness and a brightness that catches in the eye. But there's both. There's shadow and light. And that's, I think, why I end up gravitating artistically to the images moving into a more black and white realm. A lot of those, well, none of them were shot as colour images, except maybe early on in the film years. And I did start shooting this project in film, actually, show my age. So this next image on the left in particular serves as a counterbalance to that, that dark intensity to the lightness and grace and dance of the way men can interact when the walls are down and the judgment's gone away, and those found beautiful moments of camaraderie and lightness, lightheartedness and humour. That's a really wonderful part of the natural engagement with men, and a very healing aspect. So last night we did some quite deep work in an experiential heart circle, and I'll talk more about them later, literally in here. And there was a man who was carrying a lot, and he was struggling to figure out how to move through it. And he had the courage to go there with the support of us men to witness that. And in the end, one of the great tools to move him out of that space was humour. And all of a sudden, like this, what he'd been carrying for so long, humour was the path to lighten and open and move past. And by the end, he wasn't the same man. I didn't even recognise him. Isn't that right, Doug? We were talking about this just before this talk. And so that's not something to, it's quite powerful in its own way, the lightheartedness and grace and humour. There's a lot of heavy stuff going on in the world, and those beautiful found moments are wonderful. And to the right, I wanted to speak to relationship between men that's a bit more profound. So those two men were deeply, deeply, deeply connected and great friends. And they really didn't have many photographs of each other. And the invitation was there for me to honour that in a found moment. And one of those men was very, very influential on my life and on men's work in Australia in general, and he's no longer with us. And I even acknowledged last night in the circle that, well, he's here, Spirit's here, and he lives on. And I think Doug made a beautiful quote for one of the images of how we live to a certain point, but we don't pass on until the last person forgets us. And so there's a reverence there, I think, for the number of men who are in this body of work that are no longer here in body, but are certainly here in spirit. And that's another way we can honour our elders and people past that have influenced our lives, is through imagery. So there's a process that goes on. There's two kind of main spaces in a gathering. We have a physical, big, held space of a large tent, and you'll see a few pictures of it around where you can actually see the actual tent itself. The third image, and you can see people walking through the bush, and you'll see this large tent. And that was custom built by a sailor actually, a sailmaker. And we can fit up to 100 men in there. And that becomes kind of the beating core of the gathering. That's where all we meet. That's where things start. That's where the theme of a gathering is presented to us. That's where kind of the most sacred held spaces for all the men together. And then we'll move away into smaller spaces and do more intimate one-on-one work that's a bit difficult to do when you've got 100 fellas. So that's kind of this particular flow between men and our process for a men's gathering. And what I love about the left-hand images is Brendan is one of the great founders of the entire thing. And I think it was the 20th gathering where we were trying to think, what's a way that we can honour this man for all that he's done and give him an experience that will move into every cell and in his body and every part of his soul. And if you have any idea what it means to be held and swayed by all these beautiful men with an incredible poetic, Irish poetic song that we sing and is sung in that space as well, that's just, it's a bit transcendent. And I managed to have this one experience, I think 2 or 3 years ago myself, and it just changed me forever. And so I feel like there's an honouring, there's a beautiful symbolism through the hands from a pure photographic and documentary point of view. It's not necessarily about the faces of men, but it is about the intentionality of reaching out and touching and holding this man and honouring this man. And the experience of being held, I think, is something we lose from that very, very early sort of infantile part of our lives. When does that happen? When are we rocked and held? And when are we rocked and held by men for goodness sake. Like, that's not your everyday Aussie bloke experience. So coming back to that very, very early sort of aspect of what it means to be human in a context that you wouldn't expect is quite transcendental. And what I love about the image on the right is there's lots of conversations going on. There's men in tears, there's men in joy, there's men applauding, there's men exploring what's happened. I know for a fact that a brother is witnessing another brother in a very powerful, profound moment. And there was a big opening, and there was support, and there was celebration, and there was wonder, and there was, release, all going on. And I think probably not long after that, that's the last time I was allowed access as a photographer into that very, very intimate space in the middle, because it was so intimate. It was kind of like some men felt like, you know what, I don't want a camera in there. And fair enough. And so for 10 years later, I've not been in that space until last year, actually, when I was invited back in. That's another conversation. Very symbolic. Who sort of has a sense of even a simple edge of understanding about masks? Who thinks we wear masks? Where do they serve a role in our life? Do you have to put on a brave face sometime when you're a boss turning up to work when there's all this shit going on at home? Kind of you do. And it's actually quite a functional tool, and it allows us to operate in spaces and places and get through a day where it's not actually appropriate or even safe to be in a vulnerable position. And that's kind of part of our everyday living. We have different masks we put on. Sometimes you need to be a rock for your family because stuff's going on, even though you're rocked inside. So it's not a connotation of negativity about it, but it's also, you can get to a point in your life sometimes where you're just like, wait a minute, what I'm presenting to the world is nothing like what's going on inside me. And that can serve its purpose for a short period of time, but ultimately that can be quite damaging, and it can be very disempowering, and it can put you in a position where you're a bit lost because people don't actually really know who you are, and you're losing a little bit in touch with yourself about who you really are. And it's like, damn. And a gathering like this, where the invitation is to understand what these masks are, and in this particular exercise, and the theme for this year's gathering actually was around that. How do we sort of claim accountability and understanding and self-awareness for when we use those masks, and when do we want to take them off? When do we want to celebrate what's in them and realize the powerful tools that they can be, particularly for supporting other people? And when are we going to recognize the time that it's actually taking away from our well-being and potentially even damaging our well-being? And so every gathering generally has a theme, and that theme is relevant from a human level and sometimes from a more specific sort of men level. Like, so we had one called Dancing with Fire. So where I find it really interesting in men's work, there's certain stigmas about, secret men's business and what's happening out in the bush, and the women are like, what the hell's going on? And yet if you look back and you look at the wider picture of Indigenous culture and what's been happening for thousands and thousands of years as men go out and spend time with men bring boys out and do process and rites of passage to model and empower them to understand what it means to be an adult and a member of the community. And women have done the same. So there's a wonderful grace and empowerment to supporting those processes. And where I feel like one realm of that can be is one of the aspects that we're being called into account for is how we deal with anger, domestic violence. Like how do we find a constructive way to deal and understand how to deal with anger? And is that going to be easier out in the bush with a bunch of blokes rather than at home surrounded by women and girls? Like, it actually is. And it's actually going to be, it's a far more appropriate and safe space to explore issues like that. And that's where, how are you, brother? That's where the power of this work can be really paramount, because you won't often have access to a kind of space like that. And me personally, I grew up in a house with 3 girls and my mum. When was there ever an appropriate space for me to explore anger and understand how to do that in a safe way without judgment or potentially repercussion? There just wasn't. And so me personally, I found it really challenging as a man to understand how to have a healthy relationship with that aspect of humanity, which is a relevant and sometimes empowering one if you learn how to channel it into a positive space. But it can eat you up inside and do all sorts of damage if not. So that's an interesting part of the element of men's work in particular. Cover shot. What does it say to you? Give yourself a second. The young man in there, there's an older man in there, there's There's silence, there's intensity, there's connection of eyes, there's again that kind of light shadow aspect. There's that age and that age gap, or in this case, bridge. And where I feel like this one was chosen is that there's a wonderful aspect of listening, of deep, authentic, genuine, present listening. And that is the ultimate and most powerful aspect of all that I've been involved in for men's work. It's not about somebody telling you what to do or giving you advice. It's honoring another man with deep, authentic space to listen with all of who you are. And that is so powerful. To be heard is incredibly powerful and transformative alone, without any other need for facilitation or tricky processes or fancy words. That's where the deep power of men's work is, and where a lot of what you see around us has come from. And to me, that also speaks of the honouring of our elders, of something, again, if I use a cross-cultural reference, you know, and somewhere in rural China, the elders are the heart of the house right till they fall down into the grave. And they are held with great reverence, and they are the centerpiece of the family. And their earned wisdom from their life experience is considered one of the greatest resources that exists. There's no putting out to the pasture and shoving in homes and visiting on a Sunday afternoon when it's convenient, you know, which that's maybe a little bit judgmental, but I think that does happen a lot, to be fair, in our culture. So we actually take quite active, dynamic and interactive processes where we honour men and the reverence of their age and the season of life that they're in. So some gatherings I've been to, the first thing we do, having not known most men at all, is in silence, get all the men, 70, 80, 90, 100 men, to line up in order of age without saying a word. And so that process is an icebreaker, and that there's a connection, and there's physically moving around, and there's acknowledging, well, how old is that man? And does that matter to me? Or how does that change how I feel about, or where do I sit this group of men? Or what phase of life am I in? Oh geez, so it's quite reflective. And then we move in, as you'll see in some of the images, like Abbey Road over here. I call it Abbey Road jokingly, but there's often these processes we'll move into the space in silence, and in that recognition of age, to just be present with where we are in that season of our life. And some processes we've done are very much about creating a meditation around the different seasons of our life. The younger warrior, the provider, the explorer, the aged wisdom, when you're in a space of life, like Doug was talking about last night, where a lot of people in his life are passing away. So there's different seasons to life. So we acknowledge that to some extent, but that age and eldership thing is something we've done with honouring. We often have the youngest man open the exhibition and the oldest man close it, for instance, or the other way around, in terms of just honouring that significant kind of aspect of age and culture. So at this time, in this particular gathering, Ross was the oldest man, which is what I love about this image. And Brendan was actually the man who's being held up before, he was the founder. And what I love about that found moment is that utter kind of connective reverence between the different stages of life. Those two men are so easily and gracefully and welcomely connected and quite deeply present with each other. And, they're sharing things of significance. And I feel like that's beautifully spoken to this image, very quietly, I think, but quite beautifully. And that's one of the images that has a quiet spoken aspect to it, to me, that I personally really love. That relationship between father and grandfather that exists in our lives, for instance, it speaks a little bit to that. So I'm assuming it's okay, my brother, to speak a little bit of that. So this man, as far as I knew, felt like it was going to be his last gathering. He had a lot of stuff going on, and there's a wonderful poem down the back that speaks to that. So he's ready to fly away, and he's preparing himself. And I didn't see this at first, but look behind his shoulders on both sides. Angel wings. I see angel wings, whether you do or not, I do. And I was like, oh my God, I never even saw that. And when he chose that poem to speak to that photograph, I was like, oh my God, he's still with us, thank God. And in fact, he's on the committee and the board that I'm literally wrote to yesterday about this project, very, very gracefully. And what I feel is wrapped up in that photograph is that deep, reflection and surrender and preparation to let go and embrace the greatest aspect of living in a way which defines it as dying. And again, you know, there's not a lot of modeling or process that goes on about, well, how do we deal with that? You know, and it's one of the great mysteries of being alive. It's what happens when we go, and how do we want to be empowered and present for that journey, the greatest potentially the greatest journey of all. And I love that this moment of just deep present reflection and openness and surrender, that I feel like, you know, his courage in facing that is present for that to be too. And rather than ignoring it and tucking away or hiding it with humor, he's standing in that recognition of that space in his life and the limited mortality of it, and he's walking with it. And so all power to my beautiful brother for that one. One of the themes actually we used for one of the gatherings one year is no man's an island. You know, there's a certain sort of fierceness, you know, we've got to be strong, you know, we get on with things, we don't need people to prop us up. That's part of what it means to be a man. And yes, that's a great thing to have in your life, and to be able to find spaces and places in your life where you like that. But if that's all that's going on, you're left in isolation. And to me, that image speaks to that. It speaks of that, of, you know, and actually you'll notice that Gordon, who's one of the most significant people in the creation of this project, he speaks to it on the second image over on the wall there about depression as well. And to me, both of those are about isolation, about separation. I think that's where one of the great driving forces around mental health in a not so positive way is in some underlying element of isolation and separation. That's when things tend to fall a little bit down into the holes, on whatever level that means for you. And I'm very, very present that yourselves as a community here in Victoria have been one of the greatest societal acts of separation that's ever happened in modern history. You've been in a city that has been the most locked down of anywhere on this planet. And, you know, I can't even imagine what that sense of separation and isolation is, the journey that's brought you on. And you're probably more present to the impacts of that than just about anybody in the world at the moment, in your own way, in a modern society, Western society sort of way. So what a journey. You know, we're having some conversations about that last night too. How can we turn that around? What if a lot of people have been more empowered and gained things out of that as well? I don't think it's just been a negative thing. And I've really admired and been present to how the community here has pivoted around that and found ways internally in their families or within themselves to shift into more empowered spaces and more aware spaces, and I think more authentic living as well. Living from home, working from home, realigning your values, getting a bit of a reflection about what is actually important to you, how important your family is, you know, how much, you know, and even the time you would have spent commuting and all that time is now time you've got to reflect and be with families and other people as well. So, you know, there's a lot of wonderful photographers and documentary projects exploring that right now. So speaking of isolation, these are two men that, from my understanding, have had quite challenging lives, and particularly on the left, I don't know how far I go into it, but the gentleman on the left, Keith, he's seen things that not many people in the world have seen or probably shouldn't see in his life, to be honest. And it's kind of riddled through his being and in his soul, and in his later part of his life, he's doing his best to come back from that, to move through some of the experiences and the horrendous things that he's seen and been part of. And 15 years after doing men's work with him, he put his hand up to lead the gathering. And whereas for the first 10 years, you might not have heard a word out of him, type thing. So watching this transition of a man from being in a held, contained, safe space with brothers and men, and he went into a satellite men's group locally where he met every 2 weeks, and that became a really regular part of his life. He lived very isolated in the bush on his own, but that was his moving back into connecting again and moving away from isolation, and watching the transformation of connection alone, the opposite of isolation, to sort of change who he was and bring out. And you'll see if you get into, if you take the time to look at there's an interview of him done by filmmaker Troy Melbourne here, that you get a sense of just how intelligent and deep and considered and wonderful this man is, and the gifts that he's now offering the wider community, because he's been held and supported enough to move back into that empowered place is fantastic. It's a circle. It all comes back. So I remember this gentleman. I'd never met him before. He was at his first gathering. He saw me from afar with the camera, and the second he saw me, he started running in the other direction as fast as he could. So with the camera, no way, mate. And through the whole gathering, I was like, whoa. And then I saw him kind of talking to a few men and pointing my way and just saying, yeah, what's this dude about? What's this camera thing all about? You know, like what's going on? And you know, 20 years of doing this, or at that time, probably 18 years, there was a lot of positive energy and reflection of years and years and years of feedback from the work that I've done, that the men were like, he's a pretty good bloke, you know, like maybe have a think about it. And we're doing some good stuff with these photos, and they're actually for you. And right on the last day, I saw him sort of thinking about, I saw him around the corner, coming a little bit closer, and he turned around, went back a little bit closer, turned around, and I was like, and I just quietly, I didn't, you know, let him know that I knew. I just let him do his thing. And then literally 1 hour to go. Tap, tap, tap. Hey, brother. I've never let anybody take a photograph of me. But I've been listening to these other fellas about what you're doing and where these images might be going and how they can serve a cause. I want you to take the photograph. And he was shaking. Like, it was a big deal. And I was just like, oh my God, I put my camera down. And I just sat down with him 20 minutes. How you going, brother? I'm Paul. What's going on? And I just spent this time with him. It was so beautiful. I think he's like a dairy farmer in Northeast Victoria, I think. I'm trying to remember. And I finally got to that moment and I said, you ready now, bro? Yeah. Stood up, 10 seconds, bang. And what I love about what that represents in that image, there's a rawness and vulnerability in there, and that like, I'm doing this, here I am, boom, do it, mate. And so there's that physicality and there's that kind of closeness about the body language, but there's also the power that he has as a man, the physicality of his body, the rawness of his presence is powerful. And that rawness and power and vulnerability sort of dances through, to me personally, in this image, back and forth. And that's a wonderful gift that he's offered through the courageousness of that moment. And of course, I'm the only one who's going to know that. And funny enough, I had a bit of a lightning moment. We had a bit of a talk about where else and how else can we adjust this body of work to be more accessible. And I thought about, well, what if I actually go around and record all the stories behind the images in audio and maybe make that a part of what's accessible. I've seen exhibitions where you can just scan a QR code and we'll take you to the audio recording from the artist talking about the image. So I'm thinking about maybe doing that next. So any ideas like that, and that's part of the reason we're here, is to get people like yourselves to give us that kind of feedback. Oh, I've got an idea. What do you think? Or, and if you hadn't already realised, and I'll go through that later, there's an invitation of interactivity to this body of work. All these words are by people that have walked in this room, either here or other places, have been moved by those images, and I want to speak to this image. I want to share how it's moved me, how it's touched me, what I see. And then someone else comes in, oh, I never saw that. Oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, geez, I feel the same way. So, and then that conversation becomes communal, and these travel with the exhibition, and they become part of the exhibition. So it's a living, interactive, communal exhibition. And right now, I'm turning this into a book. I literally got the first draft a couple of days ago, and I'm going to reveal to you guys for the very first time the first version of it, the first working draft version. And this will become part of it forever. So I've already said, if you want to be part of this project today, you can and will be, if you choose to engage that way. So please feel welcome. So again, images. So this is my brother Darvis, you might recognize from one of those early photos, and this is his father. He spent 5 years, maybe even 7, trying to get his dad to come one of these. Yeah, he's bus driver and Lonnie, you know, pretty old school, and Tassie Morning Bread, and his, yeah, that's men's business, mate. What's going on here? Yeah, sounds a bit sus to me, mate. And eventually, kicking and screaming to some extent, he came along, and the guy just like blew up like a Christmas tree and just went, oh my God, I've been looking for this my whole life. This is unbelievable. I'm going to come to him. He's going to at least till I die. And he freaking has. And it transforms his relationship with his son, because he saw a side of his son he's never seen, and his son saw a side of his father he'd never seen. And these little intimate groups would do a lot of the deep work. His father was in my group for that first one, so I was there to witness that whole journey from never been around this sort of thing to what the beep to just like feeling like he's discovered gold for the first time in his life, and it was really powerful. And speaking of powerful, I think maybe that image on the right is easily for me personally one of the most powerful images. It's a wonderful, delicate, accessible moment between father and son. And that alone is enough. But where are they? And what have they been doing? So that land that they are on has just been gifted back to the Indigenous people of Tasmania. And it's been gifted back by a pretty hardcore cattle droving, Western Tasmania kind of guy, where his family had it all the way through from the first time it was taken off the Indigenous people in the first place. And that man, over his own time and his own independent relationship with the country on that land, he started recognizing that, oh, geez, those cattle are kind of stuffing that place up. I see all these wild creatures coming in and their food's being destroyed by my cattle. Maybe I'll just have a few less cattle this year. And he slowly transitioned his own relationship with country into one where he recognized the conservation value of it. And he turned it into a place where Darvis, funny enough, actually started doing devil tours and bringing people in to understand, the power of the natural world. And Indigenous cultures, the land and the people and the health and the well-being of each directly affects and mirrors the other. If country isn't held with reverence in a sustainable way, the people suffer. And that's where I feel like our Western culture is a little bit off the rails in that regard, and we're going to be experiencing the impacts of that lack of clarity in terms of that relationship. But this was a time when this land was held back, and he was like, right, I'm bringing, and they're both got Indigenous sort of blood running through them, and he wanted to teach his son how to walk on country and how to be reverent with country. All around there are hut depressions and seal hides and middens or living sites and tool sets all around the place. So there's living evidence for tens of thousands of years of his culture there on that land. And he was also teaching his son how to get shellfish and how to feed the family and how to cook it and how to hunt it. And I was there for 3 days as part of that, just witnessing that. And when that land had been handed back to the people. And so there's this whole wider conversation about that as well that is held up in that image. Intimacy. So Paul was here yesterday and he spent the last 2 days here. And funny enough, he'd been away from the kind of connection with men's work that he's been a part of for a long time, for quite a few years. And he just wrote me this morning and said, that's the best day I've had in years. And that was sitting and helping set this exhibition up and being in a circle with us men last night, just brought him back to life. It was really beautiful. So we had this conversation about this image. Oh, geez, what should we put this image in there? Like, are people going to think we're gay? Like, what's going on? This intimacy business. And so we had this dynamic conversation for a while, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And we're like, well, actually, that's probably the main reason we should have it in there, is to push past stigmas around that and to, again, through that courageousness of offering that, it gives this inherent permission again for a sense of ease around that and a dissolving of stigma and a welcoming of the possibility of that. So, and again, what I feel like in the image on the left with my good brother Andy, who was sending me messages about the 10-metre swell yesterday, because he's a big wave surfer, you can see the rawness of a working man. He's got working man's hands, he's got rough skin, he's a sailor, he's a wild man, and here he is in that beautifully authentic moment, being present with another man in a deeply physical way. And there's a naturalness and grace and power to that. It's kind of a bit, you just can't deny that. It's just there. And that's what I love about it. It's just totally unashamed and just present. And again, I acknowledge the courage of these men to offer these windows into their lives in that moment. So where is it happening? I was talking about these tents and the spaces, and this is a little window into those kind of worlds. So you can get a sense of how country is important and how landscape has a position here, how it's kind of a lot easier to get back into an authentic place in yourself when you're free of all the bells and whistles and the zillion Wi-Fi signals going through your brain everywhere you walk and all the tugs and pulls of everyday society and modern life. That's part of it. I personally have a 17-year career as a wilderness adventure therapist. How do we use a wild wilderness area as a therapeutic medium for personal development and growth and empowering well-being? So I have a much deeper, more personal relationship with how much country can influence. And I think it's how I'm a little bit more aware and sensitive to where the Indigenous kind of element of that comes in, that much, much older and deeper relationship with country and well-being. That's just beyond my understanding, but I know a hint of it. And there we are, and a little peek into the world of that wider circle of men, of holding space with a large body of men is quite a powerful thing to do. And again, there's a certain reverence, there's humor as well, like we have talent shows and things, so it's not all kind of serious and let's do all this hard work. There's room to ebb and flow and explore other aspects of healthy masculinity as well. So I'll go back to the bigger picture now. So where did this start from? So there's a wonderful organisation called TasMen. And that's the shortened version. Used to be the Tasmanians Men's Health and Wellbeing Association, which is quite a mouthful, and in modern times they've changed it back to TasMen. So some of these men that started and founded this organisation were involved in advising right up to a policy level in men's health and wellbeing. You know, is the law fair in the custody between men and women? You know, is the resources available for suicide prevention and mental health, even between men and women? Like, where is legislation involved in the balance in society of gender and support? And so some of these men were very, very skilled men, and they'd worked on all levels and areas of life, from wild shamanic indigenous work through to policy level and government. And collectively, they had great friendships and respect for each other, and they built a community. And I thought, well, what can we do to make this a bit more real and grassroots? And I think the very first one was the Tasmanian Men's Leadership Gathering, I think, 1999 or 2000. And that's when I kind of arrived in Tasmania around that time, as I spoke to earlier. You know, I was searching, didn't know what I was doing. I felt a bit lost as a man. And I actually saw that first one, and I thought it was a business conference when I saw the way it was written, the leadership thing. But intuitively, I felt something there. And I was like, I kind of go, but then my head was like, oh, that doesn't sound like a business thing. Maybe that's not me. And this is where that dance between head and heart, my heart was like, yeah, brother, this is it. My head's like, well, I don't know what that is. And then the following year, I saw it and I knew that's it. And I went. And I went to my first gathering in 2001. And that's where the intentionality of creating a safe, contained space where everything's confidential, everybody's welcome from all walks of life, free of judgment. Everything we do is invitation only, even though there's some of the processes and things we're invited to do can be quite full on and challenging potentially. If you want to really go somewhere and you want to be supported in doing so, there's the kind of men that have the skill capacity to hold it for you. And so you can kind of go as far and deep into that process as you want. And again, that's quite an empowering way to do it. And out of that has developed a wider community. There's a lot of satellite men's groups that have been born out of that larger one. I moved into one straight out of that gathering that I was in for 15 years, that I met for every 2 weeks. And those men are like my brothers. And so it's partly about this one event each year that's kind of like a lodestone or an anchor point for the kind of positive men's work that's happening in Tasmania. And then there's this opportunity to connect with other men locally that are then involved in different things that you can engage with. Oops, not sure what happened there. There we go. In a more everyday kind of way. And so that's where the mentors come in. There's a tasman.org.au. Well, actually, they've taken the .au off the end now. Is where you get access to that particular organisation. And I'll mention one of the local Victorian ones at the end. So I mentioned a little bit about the gatherings. Thank you. Oh, I've got it now. Let's see. What are we up to now? So the 25th gathering is coming up. And it was actually meant to be this year gone. And funny enough for me personally, I actually put my hand up to lead it. Actually, to put the camera down and lead it as a challenge to me personally. And I actually spent the last half a year, actually probably 8 months, meeting with men to design it, to come up with a theme, to think about how we can offer support in a very contemporary, modern way. And one of the things we're looking at addressing is this aspect of separation that we've all been through for the last few years. How do we move through that? How do we heal some of the things that we've gone through in that time and that separation? And how do we maybe lean into some of the aspects that could potentially become strengths as part of that? So that's an idea where each gathering people try and be present to the contemporary and modern issues that are going on in our culture, and literally use that as a thematic way to address and move through them. So one of the key aspects to what I call a container. Container, in simple words, means a space that is held, whether it's physical or emotional, and it's both. And the strength of an experience and the depth of an experience is completely defined by the strength of that container. And so confidentiality is absolutely paramount to that. So here's some guy running around with a freaking camera in the middle of this. How does that work? You know, and that's been a very fascinating part of my journey as a documentary photographer is, and part of the reason why it was quite a journey for this to come to light. The photographs were taken in the bounds of that utter confidentiality, never to be seen at all, ever, by the public. And that was the case for 17 years. And there's good reason for that. So, you know, a man comes in, he's finally feels safe in a way he hasn't before. He's ready to explore and share things he's never potentially shared before with anyone. And all of a sudden somebody comes up with a camera in his face and you don't know where the photos are going to go. He's going to be like, whoa, and just shut down like a clam. So, you know, the grace and sensitivity around those moments is really important. And a very, very clear boundaries about the use of those photographs is really important as well. And so I'll talk a little bit about that a bit further, about how that changed. But moving back, you know, you get the sense of the symbolism of the photograph I had up there earlier of that containment as well. You know, let's use a circle. What is a circle? It's a completely, utterly equal space for everyone in it. There is no higher, lower, up or down. We are all a part of it. It is never ending. It has a strength to it. So there's a beautiful aspect to that. So the exhibition itself was born for a few reasons. So I kind of started, after about 10 years, I thought, you know what? This is a really powerful body of work. I do not know where somewhere else this kind of body of work exists, actually, that it's been collected over this period of time with this level of intimacy and depth and longevity and that kind of intimacy of window into a community. So it's kind of really like, well, I went up to the board and said, you know, this is quite an amazing body of work. And I actually did a 10-year celebration to all the men. Here's 10 years of all the work we've done. And, you know, standing ovation in the room. Look what we've done together, guys. Isn't this amazing? You know, what a wonderful legacy and memories. And for individual men and the container of what it was held, the purpose of it was, imagine you go to a gathering and you go back to all the daily challenges in your life. And very, very quickly, those breakthrough moments and those shifts in who you are and the way you see yourself and the connections you have with those other men, they start fading away. Not necessarily by design, but it happens. And so where images can serve as a really powerful opportunity is reaching back into that moment. I remember that moment that I had of peace. Wow, there it was. Somebody's captured it for me. I remember the level of connection I had with that man. I remember the expansiveness that I felt when I finally shared something I've been holding on to for years, you know. And so there's anchoring, there's reflection, and the opportunity to share that with your family and loved ones as well. So it's not just this invisible, unknown experience somewhere else you don't know. So the conversations that can happen within a family about aspects of masculinity, about the transformation, about the tools that you might have learned that you could offer to bring into the partnership that you're in, whatever it is, or the relationship, or even in your daily life. And so there was a lot of inherent power, and that was enough. And so when I approached with the idea of how about recognizing that this is bigger than us, and this body of work has the opportunity to touch people way beyond our community, and let's be present with that and maybe explore the possibilities around that. And they loved the idea, but when it came back to, but what if it stopped that one man and that one moment from opening and it closed down his experience because he was worried about where those images would go? Is it worth that? And I couldn't say yes, because I actually believe that. So for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of having to go and then getting that quiet, thank you, brother, but this container is most important. And then I ended up kind of letting it go. And I thought, geez, this is probably the most powerful body of work that I've produced in my life, and it's never going to be seen by anyone outside this community. And it wasn't intended to, but I was a little bit sad about that, but I let it go, because fair enough. I was doing this work, and I know for a fact how that could influence me as well. So I kind of put it to rest. And a few years went by, and I kind of got a tap on the shoulder. The board had changed a bit. There was a new president. They'd been watching that, thinking about that, having their own conversations away from me. And they said, actually, I think we're ready to do something with this. We've been preparing and talking to other men in the community and getting a collective sense of where we're ready to go with this body of work and recognising the significance of it. And they said, we're going to go for a grant. Do you want to come along for the ride? And I was like, yeah, okay. And ever since then, it's been this collective process. So yes, I pushed the button on the shutter, but this body of work belongs to a community. This is the voice of a community. It's not my story to tell as an individual. And so everywhere it goes and everything that happens to it is done through the process of reflection and discussion and choice and decision from the entire community to this day and likely to the end of its existence. So it's quite an interesting, unusual space to be in as an artist, where actually I don't have the say about where this goes or how it's presented. And even the curation of this, which I'll get into shortly, I was only involved with to a certain extent. Quite fascinating, you know, when you're the artist, so to speak. So we got the grant, we got $20,000. We presented it with the intention of taking it all around Tasmania. And it actually has been to 4 different locations. It's been exhibited for more than 11 and a half months. It's had upwards of 10,000 people through it. And, you know, quite a big process to go from 20 and now actually 25,000 images down to 47, I think, was a hell of a process. I'll get into that. And you'll see collectively there's the words of the men, there's the interviews behind, and there's the experiential heart circles. And I'll flesh those out a little bit more as we go through. So if you'd ever been through a grant process, I think we absolutely fluked it, to be honest. We didn't have a lot of experience around grant processes. Quite often the big ones, they can take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years before yours rises to the front and actually becomes the one they choose to give the money to. And we literally put it in and we were first off the rank, and we had it before we even finished even ink drying. And we were like, oh my gosh, we thought it could take years, and it literally took no time at all. So we got a little bit lucky there, and we hit the ground running. And so we, you know, most grant processes have a level of aims and outcomes and also accountability. They want some sort of sense of evidence of what has been a result of the money they've given you. What is a qualitative or quantitative way to measure even kind of the impact of what you've created? So how do you do that with something like this? You know, that's quite interesting. Partly numbers and partly conversations, and a lot through this. This is real, tangible evidence of impact. And so it's been beautiful. We didn't have that idea at first. This was a spontaneous idea kind of early on, and now it's become one of the most beautiful parts of the whole thing, which I love. So a grant and a project like this, it's not about individuals. It's really been a real team effort. So my brother Anthony in the back here introduced me before. We've been there all the way through, and Gordon, the second in the photograph there, he was absolutely crucial. He actually started the grant process. And even now, it's a collective team involved around this. And this is a little bit interesting for us here, because we're out of our turf now. We don't have 500 Tasmen behind us coming over the ditch, and so we don't know that many people over here. And so it's quite a different process. And the idea is for it to travel and go around. Sponsorship has been a part of it. An acknowledgement of Ilford Australia actually gifted us all the paper. And it's this beautiful Ilford textured bag paper, which some of the photographers have actually already asked me about. I wanted a paper. Matte paper gives them more, I think, a more intimate feel. You'll notice that there's no glass. I didn't want anything at all to take away from the intimacy and accessibility of the content. You know, and a reflective glass can do that. It can be like you can see half the room behind you, or it's quite distracting sometimes. And there's a certain vulnerability also to that, because anyone could walk in here and destroy these in a second. So there's an element of trust actually as well. And then from a very physical point of view, they're 10 times lighter, and you don't have to worry about glass breaking. So in terms of its transportability, which was its intention, it's actually wonderful. And we've got some wonderful funding before probably just before COVID, to bring it over here, where we got custom-made boxes done for each image. So, and they're standing up beautifully, aren't they, Anthony? Yeah. So the City of Hobart funded the venue for the first one. Full Gamut was the gallery that printed them all, and they're the top gallery in Tasmania by far. And all my exhibition work I've done with Simon Olding in particular. I do all my own kind of exhibition and awards work myself, but I thought, no, this is bigger than me. And by having somebody I trust, some of the images got damaged, and I was away overseas, and next thing you know, he's got the file, they've printed it, they've sent it, and it's all sorted. And that would never happen if I was trying to do it myself. So it's been quite empowering to, again, have a more community aspect. And the timing worked beautifully for Ilford. They were just trying to get a presence in Tasmania. Here's this wonderful project for them to showcase it. So there's a win-win across that. And if you're going to engage sponsorship, you need to also just recognise it's a two-way street. You have to be aware of what kind of you're offering back as well. It's not just a take. So using the opportunity to respectfully acknowledge their support and finding subtle ways to do that is part of that dance. So if you're ever going to move into a community project, that's something to be very conscious of. That's what I've learned a bit more about. So if this works, this is sitting in my house with Anthony, 6 years ago? I don't know, with hundreds of printed images all over couches and tables and floors. Where the heck should we get started with 20,000 images about how they can possibly tell a story? Where are the gaps? Where are the pillars? Where is a comprehensive story? How do we pull it down to just 45, 47 images? We went from 500 to 400 to 320 to 100, and you've got to have a pretty good space to exhibit 100 images. So what's actually a number to aim for that is wide enough to tell a wider story, but intimate enough to actually be able to carry in having spaces that might be big or small. You don't necessarily always have control over where they're going to be exhibited, and you need to adapt to each place. And so we chose that size of A2 that has a little bit of impact, but it doesn't, overwhelm the space. We also, you'll notice, there's a sense of framing about them in the images, but actually it's just the paper. So we just had extra white paper around the image to be the frame, rather than going to all the extra time and expense of doing matting. And it actually works beautifully in itself. And again, it keeps the weight down and also the cost down a little bit as well. So little tricks like that sort of make a difference in the long run. So here's, a little bit of a view into that process of the printing. I was in there for weeks, I think, on and off, going back and forth, and different sort of reprints. And I actually shifted some from colour to black and white because I felt retrospectively they were going to have more impact in that way. And I even pulled back some others to colour because I felt like I did want to have a splash of colour. Like if I look over here to this set of 4, colour really brings the landscape into the conversation that would be lost without colour. And I wanted the land and the country and the place we're in to be part of that conversation and to be acknowledged. The black and whites do a wonderful job of pulling it into the emotion and expression and dynamic between people in the moment. And I feel like the colour to some extent brings the environment a little bit more into the conversation. So that's obvious and simple and less obvious ways. So the very first photograph, you'll notice, is actually just a landscape. How's that about men's work? It's a road. And yet, yesterday, I probably had 5 people come up to me saying it was one of the more powerful images in the exhibition for them. So that is the actual road that we drive down to go to these gatherings where all these images are taken. Literally. And being down that road 18 years in a row, I remember all that I was going through. That's the time where you're like, okay, I'm feeling the world fall away a bit. I'm going bush. This is the last place there's any reception. I'm not going to be connected to all the distractions and influences of everyday life anymore. I know I'm going to be with these men, and that's it for that time. So it's a transition point. What I also love about that particular image, sorry I don't have it up here at the moment, but it looks like it could be anywhere in Australia. It could be outback New South Wales. It could be Northern Territory. It could be Queensland. It could be New South Wales. It has that real Australiana kind of semi-arid eucalyptus kind of forest sort of feel about it. So, and there's also a deliberateness to the curation where, with the kind of idea in mind, where could this go? This may end up around Australia, may end up around the world. I didn't want it tied or locked into being just Tasmanian. It was all captured in Tasmania, and very proud of that. But I think there's more power in the universality and the accessibility of it to a wider audience than there is in just showcasing Tassie. So even though there's hints of that there, it's not an over-dominating part of it being tied to one particular place. It's more about the men's work. So that was one of the aspects of the deliberation. There was, I think it took half a year, actually, to curate the work. And we had forums, and we had young boys and girls, and we had women and parts of Tasman and public come in to have conversations about what spoke to them and how we want to tell a story. And so again, pretty interesting to put your heart and soul into 20 years of work, and you're actually only partly involved in the curation of it. It's like, okay, I just got to let go. I push the button, but the voice is the community. So that's been quite amazing, actually, letting go. And I noticed, I just spent 3 months putting a book together, and I didn't notice till last night, I didn't even have a name in it. There was nothing showing that I'd even taken the pictures, because I was kind of so used to the fact that, you know, it's a voice for the community, and I'm just kind of a vessel sort of helping it come along. I think this was just a little intimate moment where here I am putting my personal little touch and wrapping them up and getting them ready for the first exhibition and seeing them come to life. And you know, that tiny little bit of personal blood and tears, and that little bit of personal pride as an artist, I guess, as well. It's not a small thing to undertake a project like this. And I think as an artist, it's not many times in your life you feel like you've created something that's bigger than you, that's going to stay around longer than you, and that's more that you could possibly think to speak of on your own. And I feel really, really lucky that I've been running around long enough to kind of be in a position where that's actually happened in my lifetime. You know, there's a lot of image makers in the world and a lot of powerful work being done, and I'm really proud to be connected with this. So first of all, photographic exhibition, great. Is there a lot of power in photographs? Yes, there is. Is it beyond words often? Absolutely. But some people get deeper insight by moving through an auditory or word-based process. That might be a way that some people will connect with this work better and more deeply. I'm a really visual person, but I know other people that aren't. And then we came up with the idea of, what about if we invite each man in the photographs that we finally curated to speak to that image? What was that about for you? What was going on for you? What does it represent to you? How are you feeling? What do you want to express about what was going on in there? And so we invited, and it took a while to get these men to come in and engage with the work and share that. And you'll see poems, stories, reflections, words that speak to the image. And not every image has a man in it, so we actually chose or invited a man to speak to about that particular image in their own way. But most of them do, and most of them are. So when you see the name underneath the photograph, that's the man who's spoken to speak about it, and they're in that photograph. And some of them, like David, are in a different realm, still engaged with the work. And that's become a beautiful part of it too. And then we thought again, well, that's one or two mediums. What about another medium? What about another bridge? What about getting these men to actually slow down and speak and share their stories in front of camera? That is a way that you can engage with work, and no other way can touch that. So we did. And we got a filmmaker called Troy Melville, who's done some wonderful films for the ABC, and he came into the gathering, and we slowly kind of filtered through who was ready or felt like they wanted or felt courageous enough to share their story on camera. And my beautiful brother Michael here, who's the photograph of him and his son out on the Aboriginal country I was telling you about, it's him. And again, I've been getting messages from him about the 10-metre waves for the last few days. And I'll be sharing stories with him when I go back tonight. But this, I think, is a very, very quick, short summation that includes Anthony in a few minutes. It's like a 30-second teaser, but it'll give you a taste of just a few moments and snapshots out of these 13 kind of films. I hope the sound's going to work okay. Just to give you a quick taste. And I actually posted this a couple of days ago as a prompt to let people, often people didn't know this was an aspect of the wider body of the project?
I feel society needs to know that men are capable of this emotion.
Speak to the need in the society that men do want to improve their life.
My time when I was progressed with some of the stories that I hear.
Towards the guys, but I'll try again.
Yeah, it's healthy and good for men.
There's my mate Keith at the end there, who's been through that journey. Is there something I'm doing wrong just in terms of presenting that one? Gotcha. So if I turn that off, that should fix it. All right, we'll see. I'll just try that again, guys. I lost the thing. Tech geniuses. Is that there? No, is that there? Yeah, there it is. Try that again and see how it goes. Hopefully I'll fix it. No. Sound on your end? No.
Speak to the need in the society that men actually want to
It's healthy and good.
It's really important.
So sorry about the interruption, but can you feel that tiny tug on something a bit different? That's maybe different from what you might have been touched by a slow reflective process like this. So we leaned into that and we created a wider body of that. And I'll have a crack at showing you one of them. We have it playing during the exhibition on loop. So we'll put that back on again afterwards, and if you want to come back another time. But you can also find a way to access this online. So I'll have a crack at this and see if it works. It's not crucial if it works or not, but we'll have a crack at it.
So it's a chance to get together and do some minor personal development work, but also create like a fellowship to support each other as we go through life challenges. And this time we've been through hard things, and it's quite hard to let go of those issues sometimes, especially in isolation. So I guess it's the antidote to isolation is connection and a bit of a community where the intent is to heal, really. So for me as a dad, my intent is to do as much work on myself, so I pass on as little baggage to my son as possible. So for me, the gatherings are a chance to kind of inspire a different way of being a man, a different model, if you like, where men do talk about their issues and what's going on. Working through your emotional challenges and woundings and issues takes a lot of courage. There's this misconception that, if a man cries, he's weak. That's bullshit. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of balls to actually open yourself up and start unpacking some of this stuff. And if we can do that in a supportive way, then it's less likely to come out in unconscious or negative ways. So it's a supportive environment where we can do our work on ourselves, and doing so ends up benefiting our partners and our friends and our kids. Unless you're really lucky to have some, open, emotionally intelligent mates around, it's not that easy to find people to talk to about stuff. You can go and see a counsellor or a psychologist, but that can be quite impersonal. It's different when you've just got friends or fellow, brothers, fellow men who are helping you because they care about you and who you are. It's a bit like taking myself in for emotional service and oil check. I've got plenty of stuff that I've been holding on to over the year, and things I want to let go of. And it's kind of scary to open up and share your emotions, and also the bits of you that aren't that socially acceptable to show or that nice. So you get to talk about real issues, real for me, and work through them and, come out the other side. So for me, it's just fantastic. I went to a gathering a few years ago, and it was a father-son team, and it really cut me up quite deeply. my dad was a Vietnam veteran and a bit of an alcoholic and had a pretty hard time. How do you come back from, the trauma of war? And, he coped with it through, drinking a carton of beer a day, which kind of helped him cope, but I won't say it was great for the family. It wasn't great for me as a son. He was a wounded man, and he didn't have the support that we've got in an event like this. He didn't have mates that would be real and honest and open with him. So they'd go to the pub and drink, and their conversations would stay in a pretty shallow well. So he had to hold that burden and that trauma of what he's been through and done by himself, and he took a lot of that to his grave, and that chewed him up inside. I think that's what happens when a man becomes wounded and goes down. People around him often get hurt. But I don't blame my dad for any of my issues. He was doing the best he could with what he had. I went with 3 of the men from the gathering into the nursing home and saw my dad and told him I loved him before he died. And I'm so glad I did that for him and for me. And I think he passed on feeling a bit more at ease with himself. Because he would have known that in different ways he wasn't a good dad. And that's hard to face up to. Yeah. But to have, as he got older, he needed my approval and my love. It's interesting. When I was younger, I needed his approval and love. But as my dad got older and had a couple of strokes and wasn't well, he needed my love and approval. So rather than be bitter and blame him for things, I forgave him and told him I thought he did a good job and did the best he could, and that I love him. And I think that was good medicine.
The kind of special to me, I knew Michael's father, and I was witness to that journey and his passing, and that challenge of, turning something that could have easily been held and understandably held as, an unfair impact on him, as to what he wanted from his dad as a son, to putting that aside and being the bigger man to actually support his father. And, I'm sure some of us are privy to that transformation that can happen in later life, where you become the support network for your parents, and that shift that comes the other way around. I've only just kind of learning that. I'm going to go home in a few weeks and see my mum. I haven't seen for 3 years, and she's getting to that stage in her life where she's almost at that point where that transition's happening as well. But you can get a sense of the beauty and the power of the courageousness of that kind of sharing, and just how they can reach people, and the accessibility of these men's world and their inner worlds is a beautiful, intimate gift that they've offered all of us. So my hat's off to my beautiful brothers like Michael, and my hat's off to Troy Melville as well, who's put this incredible skill and sensitivity as a filmmaker to work. Again, he gifted his time to the community for this, as we all have. So that's been travelling with the exhibition, and it's been an integral part of the exhibition. We've had it running openly here, and other times we've had it more intimate, where you put your headphones on and just move into the world. And we've had people come back day after day and go through 6 or something. We've had people stay there for the whole lot. We've had people come back with all their work colleagues. We've had all sorts of people coming back to spend time and hold place and have conversations around what this triggers. And that's what it's all about. What is healthy masculinity? What are the qualities that I would like to pass through to my son? What do I want to encourage with or engage with or support my partner in terms of bringing into our relationship, How do I want to operate as a boss? How can I be a good brother? How can I be a good son? And what does that mean? And how can that change? And what do we want to support in our society to represent all of those things? And that's really what this exhibition is all about. So the next phase of that was, that's us kind of presenting to everybody else. And that's, in some ways, a bit of a one-way conversation. How can we make it more of a two-way conversation? And I spoke of that already. Well, what if we got a level of interactivity where people were invited to engage with the images themselves? And so we came up with the idea, I think it might have been Anthony initially, I'm trying to remember, what if we come up with these beautiful little cards and we put a bit of a stick and a string down, and people could place their thoughts, their feelings, their reflections, the way they were moved by something, and make an offering of their own into the exhibition itself, which becomes a part of the exhibition, and that conversation of their feelings becomes something that other people can bounce off and be moved by and interact with, and collectively we've been pulling them all together into the book. So it's literally going to become part of the legacy of this body of work, is your impact and your words and your feelings. And we also have the visitors book, which we regularly photograph and bring into the wider sort of conversation and resource of the body of work. So last night, and in every exhibition, we're like, well, that's all good, but I still don't really know what this men's work is or what it actually means. So we decided to actually have something experiential. So we held and have held at every exhibition talking circles, what we call heart circles, where come along and we'll give you a hands-on idea. What is it actually like to be in a circle of people, of men? And actually, we segued sideways into women as well. Actually, I'll go into that shortly. Where you feel safe, where it's confidential, where there's no judgment, where anything is welcome, where the walls come down, and that shift from the heady world we often live in to the sort of embodied part, kind of real, authentic space of what's actually happening for you on a deep present way. And that is welcome. And the idea is that it's witnessed. It's not a conversation necessarily. It's you getting the opportunity to just speak, and all these people, what they call hold space. They kind of collectively hold you emotionally and otherwise. Hard to put into words until you experience it, but that's kind of what it's like. It kind of feels like you're being held. And that takes time sometimes to be held to actually sink into the safety and the ease and the grace and the beauty and the love that can be present with that. And that can happen through complete silence and just intention. But it is important that the people running it have a bit of skill of how to set that up, and they send boundaries around that make that quite tangible and real. And that's where the power and depth can happen, when you spend time allowing that container to be present. So we did that last night, right here in this room, and it was absolutely beautiful. And quite interestingly to see on the end, with the first one we did, we've done 25 years of men's work, and all of a sudden the woman, like, there was this big list, there was growing list, men said, well, this night, and the woman, what about us? We want to be part of this. And we're like, oh my God, we do men's work. Like, we don't know much about this. What are we going to do? And they're like, we got to figure something out. We're really interested in this. This is amazing. We want to be part of it. So we went back to the board and we had to talk about it. And we were like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's challenge ourselves. Let's give ourselves an opportunity to grow as men. And let's open up this wider conversation about masculinity to a forum of men and women in a safe, contained, confidential way. Where does that happen? And we were nervous. Oh my God, what's going to happen? We open up a can of worms, it's going to blow up in our face. So we're going to, but when we got the first opportunity to say, well, how about it? You know what, boys? If you really want to know what's going on, here we go. Careful what you ask for. And it was a little bit like that, to be honest. And I went to every single one. And it was quite full on, but it was amazing. So we got one of the most skilled and powerful facilitators in female work in Tasmania. And we got one of the main founders and most incredibly skilled men to come in as well to hold space. So we didn't know I was going to go. We had 5, 6, 7 Tasmen in there as well to kind of collectively be part of that held space, so we could be there for whatever happens. We didn't know how it was going to go. It was a bit edgy, wasn't it, Anthony? And it was incredible. And I think it's maybe okay to share one example of where that was so powerful. The very, very, very last time we did in Tasmania, where we held the men's and women's space. There was 10 men, there was 10 women. We put aside an hour and a half. We got to an hour and a half. We got to 2 hours. We got to 2.5 hours. We got to 3 hours. We got to 3.5 hours. And then we knock on the door saying, oh, we're closing the building. And we had to go. And there was one woman that hadn't spoken. And we were a bit present to that. And we were like, and there's no onus on whether you talk or not. Like, being a witness is a really powerful thing. Holding space and being present and listening to someone genuinely is incredibly powerful alone. You don't need to say anything. But we also said we have this last opportunity for you to share. If you'd like to, we'd love to hold space if you would. But this is your last opportunity. So, and she was like this. She was shaking. We were like, "Oh, what's going on?" And she stood up and she said, "I have not been able to be in a room with a closed door and a man in it for 20 years." And she, oh, I got to start crying, but so she was just enveloped and wrapped up by three men who stood up, who didn't even know her, and just held her and sang to her and rocked her as she cried. And she finally felt this moment of feeling safe around men that she hadn't experienced for so long. So I didn't even know that was possible. I had no idea it was going to happen, and it was just freaking incredible. So, you know, there's things that have happened around this that I know nothing about. You know, there's one story of a little young boy. He's 12, 13. He came in on his own. I wasn't there. And a woman who kind of knew who he was saw him walk in. He spent 3.5 hours in the exhibition on his own. And he spent really time listening to all the videos, read all the words, sat in front of all the men. And then he smiled and said, "Thank you." And he had his head out and he walked out. And he walked out looking way more determined than he walked in. And so the woman who knew him in the community thought, I felt a bit of responsibility to follow up of how that impacted him. And it turned out he'd been estranged from his father for years. And this was like his moment where he's like, no more. Oh, so, I want my dad back. So he rang him, and he rang him, and he rang him until he answered. And he said, I want my dad back. And he went away camping with him that weekend, and he slowly spent the last year or two building that relationship back up. And I never witnessed that moment. I didn't even know it existed. There's 10,000 people that have gone through this exhibition, and I wonder what all the other stories are. And it was amazing just to get one or two like that. So, you know, sometimes with the body of work on this, we pull this little energy, and you have no idea if it's going to have any impact, and you just got to have the faith and hope that it does. And it's amazing to just have access and window to a few stories like that. We're like, you know, if nothing else happens ever from this, it's worth it just for that. So yeah, and then it also gives me hope and wonder about what else could happen. And that's where we're kind of on a precipice with this body of work. Well, where to next? We're in Tasmania. We don't have the resources to run this around the country. We don't have the funds. We don't have the energy or the manpower. So we did in Tasmania. And so the level of potential impact is massive. So we're trying to pivot a little bit and be a little bit clever about, you know, so moving into what I'm designing right now is a book of all this, an ebook. So an ebook is probably one of the most accessible forms this could possibly reach out to the community, because how many people are going to walk through that door compared to the 5 million people that are in the city? And what's the percentage? You know, 0.00001. So thinking outside the square a little bit about how we can pivot and alter and make the work a bit more contemporary and accessible to the wider community is kind of where we're at. So your ideas are very welcome. And I just went through kind of the impact of those particular heart circles. So 4 exhibitions in Tasmania. We had 6 days in Hobart initially, which was one of the longest 6 days in my life. I think I was there till midnight every day. There was 6 men there the entire time holding space. I don't know how many people were moved to tears. I lost count. And we were there just moving through so many things. It was super powerful. And then we moved to the Burnie Regional Arts Gallery, where that young fella came through. We moved to the Queen Victoria Museum in Launceston for 3 months, which is a really incredible space. Then we had half a year back in Hobart again, right next to the ABC in central Hobart at the Baha'i Centre. The idea then, we moved and got an invitation to be part of Head On, which is the biggest photographic event in Australia. And we'd organised a gallery, and right on Oxford Street was all ready to go. And we started having conversations with the men's groups in South Australia, and was moving there to support their gathering and generate interest around men's work. Then we had philanthropists and men's workers in WA and Queensland that were wanted it next. And the momentum was building. And we started a fundraising campaign, and that was working really well. And then 3 guesses, COVID. So now we're kind of we had 2.5 years of sort of, you know, all that momentum just sort of falling away. And this is our first kind of Kickstarter coming back up again. So, you know, it's not quite the same world that it was a few years ago. And we'd love your kind of thoughts about where to from here and how this can be used. one of the ways I thought about it is there's a lot of organisations out there addressing men's work or men's health and wellbeing. Could be suicide prevention, could be domestic violence, could be Beyond Blue, or other organisations I have nothing about. Like, we have an incredible body of work that explores really positive aspects of masculinity that probably not many people are ever going to have access to. So can other organisations be benefited by having access to that? You know, imagine, and this has actually happened where school groups come through, where they're talking about masculinity and what it means at school. And imagine them walking into this. Here's your homework. Pick an image about a quality of masculinity that speaks to you and write about it. You know, that's actually happened. That's another way that we didn't even think of. So we're looking at recognising this quite amazing body of work that we have and how it can be used to better men's health and wellbeing anywhere in Australia and the world for that matter. So if you have connections, ideas, then they're actually really, really welcome. And we're kind of just re-emerging again from a bit of a couple of years of being tucked away to opening up to the possibility. And that's not something that individually Anthony and I are going to be able to run on our own. So basically, we're all ears. So I've kind of spoken to a lot of these already. The idea also is that when it travels around Australia, it's used as a forum, as a spark of interest, as a conservation point, as a meeting zone to generate interest and energy and conversation wherever it goes around men's health and wellbeing and what is positive masculinity. How do we deal with toxic masculinity or Me Too? Like, all those elements are part of that conversation. But if it goes to a place, it has a wonderful connective capacity and energy and conversation building element to how that can generate energy and interest in that realm, wherever it goes. So we've had men here that run groups in Victoria that are part of it. We've invited local men's groups to come in here and have their men's groups here while it's here, which is a really powerful thing to do. And we're pretty open about how it moves from here. And we had some great conversations last night about where to. We may actually try some regional areas, because in some ways being in a small town could be actually more powerful than being washed away in the larger conversation of a huge one like this. And it might have more generated, really targeted impacts on that community that are a bit more tangible even. So all ears. But underneath it is this potential push of a paradigm shift from vulnerability as being weakness, which is kind of a little bit more of a traditional Aussie kind of thing. I think that was really appropriate made during wartime and things like that, where vulnerability would get you killed, basically. You had to find a way to shut down and fight and be there in that moment and push past your fears and shut your emotional world down to fight it and for the freedom of your families and your country. But thankfully, we're not quite in that space. But that generation and then the next generation that lost a lot of their fathers, there's been a bit of a tricky transformation of how we come back to maybe a more healthy aspect of that around vulnerability in particular. Vulnerability is seen as something scary, and yet it's where all the beauty is. It's where the healing happens. It's where the joining happens. It's where people come in that feel okay to not be okay, and then all of a sudden people are like, I feel purposeful because I can support this person, so I feel good, and everyone gets lifted and things shift and move and grow and evolve, which is not possible with she'll be right, mate, just have another beer here, don't worry about it, mate. That doesn't sort of open up any potential to move or grow or evolve or to heal, essentially. And, you know, if it filters out into another thing we've been really conscious of is that any exhibition that we hold, we have men that are skilled in men's work present, and then also have access to the local knowledge. Well, what are the local men's groups? Or if somebody's like, you know, I'm really moved by something, where are some support networks to go? And so we have had men at our exhibition that have held space with that and offer opportunity for that. And so in the back of the book, I'm actually building up a resource network for local men's groups and all around the country and different larger organisations and groups that can offer support or have portals where people can, you know, follow through on what they might be moved by or present to, or even have lifted, and this has helped them find the courage to actually be ready to face or to move forward with or to reach out. So as a photographer, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about sensitivity. I've learned a lot about moments where it's not okay to take a photograph. And that's been just as important as me finding the personal courage to actually nudge the boundaries a little bit to go there, because it's easy to not go there because it's a little bit scary. And sometimes I've had to be like, you know what, in this moment, like it's edgy, but wow, the power of that and the capacity of that moment to reach back into that man's life or a man's around him is incredible. And that was a slow process for me as an artist. And when I talked about that 10 years when I wasn't allowed in that intimate kind of held space in the middle, and I was allowed back in there for the first time in a decade, was it last year? Year before? Last year. And things had changed. I had a different camera system and it was mirrorless and I could put it on completely silent. And I've never been able to do that. It's a simple thing. But when you're in this deep process, it's an utter silence happening between men. The sound of a shutter changed the whole experience. Changed the whole thing. Like it would be instantly, you know, that, what's the word? Or there's a lot of words around that. But that's a body of work that's actually been happening and evolving since this. The last image in here was taken 4 years ago. And there's lots more wonderful men's work and imagery that's happened since then. So I'm hoping to bring some of that into the more contemporary ebook, for instance. And I'm pretty excited about that. And I've already reached out to get permission from those men to do so. So there's an organic growing element to this that I'm hoping that this body of work holds its relevance for a long period of time. It doesn't just die away in irrelevance through natural aging. And I think there's enough in here that it can do so. So sensitivity, permission, a huge aspect of why this exists is respect and honouring of boundaries. So that confidentiality, I never, ever, ever once broke that in 21 years. And God help me, it was tempting. There were some incredible things I wanted to share with my family and my friends and people that were doing a hard time and hope I wanted to give that I knew would have a positive impact on those particular people, but it would be compromising the integrity of that agreement. And if you're going to take on any sort of long-term documentary project, that relationship and that trust is utterly paramount. And if that's broken, you've kind of lost and you're going to have a hard road coming back. So big transition, and that patience, that 5 or 7 years where I just had to think like, this is amazing, this could change the world or somebody's life. Yeah, okay. You know, so that was kind of an interesting process. I reflect about that. And then again, those two stories I offered, don't underestimate the power of your imagery. It can touch people in ways you had no idea or never even thought of. And I've lost count of the number of ways where that's happened in my life. Yes, you have your own inner critic as a photographer. Is that a powerful image? Is it well composed? You know, does it tell a story? But it amazes me what I see, what I find people seeing in images that I never saw. Even now, looking at them for 10, 15 years. Oh my God, you know. So that's a wonderful part of what I've learned a lot from as an artist through this process. And there's a lot to be said for teamwork, you know. Like I can't tell you how exciting, wonderful it's been to have Anthony here. I've seen him. I was literally watching him flying down the street, chasing people down and getting people up the street the last few days. I didn't know he was that kind of guy. And it was kind of like the energy and the collective impetus of what's been happening here has, you know, influenced my good friend here who's been doing this for years. And it's kind of important for us to find ways to nurture our excitement as well, because we've kind of been pushing the wheelbarrow about here and keeping it running. And if we weren't part of it, it wouldn't be here. So very, very luckily, and part of the natural momentum was we got a couple of very wonderful awards to acknowledge the community impact on the health and the well-being of men and boys in the community. And that was very unexpected and really, really welcome, because it gives, when you're trying to find funding or arts grants or you want to show accountability for your impact, that's another tangible reference to like this grant. Well, actually this is recognition of the impact of that by a body external to you. So it serves, I was excited because I felt like this is potentially going to help open doors. And next thing you know, the last time we had the Minister of Health open the exhibition. He was now the Premier. And a little story about him. So here's an 18-year hardened politician. He's naturally interested in men's health. He came the day before. And he spent hours on his own, and he was writing notes and he's building a speech. And I actually knew the person who was writing the speech with him. They took 3 days to write a speech. And he came along and he had the speech all ready. And beautifully and very personally to me, I had Craig Everett ring me up. And he's one of the most significant members in the Tasmanian Indigenous community. And they don't have an easy relationship with white fellas, and they don't easily offer things to that community because, you know, they've been through basically genocide, and there's a lot of trust that has to be earned over a long time for them to engage with you know, us white fellas. So, and I've been doing work with them for 20 years, just gifting it, because I felt like I wanted to offer that to that community. And as my father said to me, and one of the reasons I do the work that I do, he said, if you have a gift, son, there's an invitation, if not a responsibility, to use it to make the world a better place. Doesn't matter what that gift is, and just be present with that. And that has been a guiding force in a lot of my life, and it's one of the reasons I'm sitting here now. And so I've done that with that community, and Craig said, you know what, fella, I'm going to bring my mob, and I want to open an exhibition for you and do real country and cleansing, and I love what you're doing, and it's affected my brothers and my friends that are in this exhibition, like Michael. And he came with a whole full mob, with full regalia, did smoking ceremonies, traditional dances, and it was massive, and it impacted everyone. And that was before we even walked into the freaking exhibition. And then there's people like Ranald who founded it, and Anthony, and another man who spoke, and they were speaking so much from here, and there was so much power in the room that poor old Minister of Health had to get his speech and chuck it in the freaking bin, because it was not going to fly. Politics is not going to fly in that room. And you could see him just trying to prepare himself, and he realized, you know, like the power of it was impacting him too. And he felt that openness, and he thought, stuff it. And he went in and did totally off the fly about his challenges as a husband and a father and things he went through as a boy. And we were all just sitting there going, that's not what we're expecting. And I wasn't sure exactly what he wasn't expecting. He was there till 9:30 at night, and it was just about the last person there. And he still had to drive 3 hours to Launceston because he was that impacted by it. So again, you know, totally unexpected influence. And it was wonderful to get to a point that we were starting to have impacts on people that could make significant changes in the community, that were in charge of policy changes, that had natural awareness. So, you know, and that took years to get to, and that's maybe inspiration for things that you might be involved in, that you're just chipping away at thinking, well, how can I make a difference? Well, step by step by step is how you can make a difference. And even if it just helps one person, it's worth it, you know. So, you know, I've had a big part of my life in the world of conservation as well. So where to from here? And I actually meant what I said. A lot of it is kind of up to you. It's kind of up to the wider community. Like we've kind of addressed and successfully addressed the grant and all the things that we set out to do and the goals we set in Tasmania. And we have this wonderful group of men in Tassie that are there, but we don't have the time, resources, energy, or mandate actually to support it going around the entire of Australia. Like Anthony and I got ourselves over here, you know, and it's the gratitude I have to the people that have been putting me up and giving me somewhere to stay, you know, because there's no funding for us to be here. But at the same time, and, you know, the generosity of the Melbourne Camera Club and Mark and Sally and Paul to gift their time to offer this incredible space and to hold the exhibition, that's why it's here. So it's here through the generosity and real commitment of other people in the community. And that's kind of how it should be with a project like this, to be perfectly honest, ideally. So all doors are open to any sort of conversations, ideas, connections, places, spaces, people, organisations. And I actually invite you to genuinely keep that in mind and take the opportunity to be a part of this, to write your thoughts and feelings. If it comes to you later, we could probably find a way of putting it in there. And I'm kind of excited for regenerating that natural momentum that it had to where it's going to go. And Anthony and I joke a lot about Paris and New York, but we're still dreaming about it. We were sitting up, I don't know if you remember, Anthony, in Hobart, and a guy came into the room and he just went, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one, this big. New York, Natural Museum, given the power of those images, this body of work, the timeliness of what it represents for this culture. And it turned out he was some super big-wig museum curator in New York who was actually just on holiday, and he was just walking past by accident, saw the sign. We hadn't even finished setting it up yet. And we were like, whoa, you know, so it was our first kind of taste that, well, this is actually potentially way more significant than we ever thought it could be. And we didn't know how it was going to be received. We didn't know if we'd get a whole bunch of like gay bashers coming out going, oh, you bunch of freaking brats, what are you doing? You know, we didn't know how the press was going to go. It was quite risky and quite courageous to put it out there, but almost without fault, the feedback's been incredible. And I think that's partly just the natural timing, I guess, Doug, like, you know, of when it got revealed. You know, it was a wonderful, again, counterbalance to what was going out there in conversation in the wider community. And it's a wonderful resource, I think, for wellbeing in general. So if you can think of ideas or maybe even who might benefit or gain a lot from from this work or access to it in some way, shape or form, then let us know. This today is actually the first day of National Men's Health Week, and that is not a coincidence. We deliberately have brought this year in reverence and respect and honouring and the possibility to generate more interest around men's work and men's wellbeing in general. So there's a few organisations that have a big role in letting you know what's going on, and there's quite a few events happening around the whole of Australia, and the AMHFH, which is the Australian Men's Health Forum, is one. There's another website that's specifically dedicated to what's going on for those different things. We're here till the 3rd of July for this exhibition. It's currently open the next 3 weekends. Is that right, Anthony? Anthony's coming in for the last one. We've got a couple of spots we need to fill for volunteers. I think next weekend or weekend after, or both. So 25th and 26th. So if you want half a day of spending time in here and supporting something really special and having conversations, which might surprise you actually when you get out of it, of how this influences people, then if you can approach Anthony, just 10:30 to 3. So we made it kind of like those gentlemen's hours in terms of accessibility and recognising that people wanted to drive a fair way. And I've just slipped through a couple of shots, my Abbey Road shot. My good mate in the middle there, he's actually over in the corner. Mikey, he's a big wave surfer. Yeah, quite a conversation about that one. Menergy is a group that's involved in Victoria. They have a gathering similar to what we do from the 6th to 9th of October here in the beautiful East Gippsland. And if you want to sort of start a conversation about, well, what's going on in Victoria? Where there's a local men's group? How do I get started? Then that's an obvious reference point to go to spend a bit of time and get a sense of what's possible here. So the very, very last thing I'm going to do, which I've never shown anybody because it literally just arrived in my inbox this morning, is the first taster of the working draft of the Men with Heart book. So welcome to the inaugural release. Anthony hasn't even seen it yet himself. My beautiful friend Dower Dykstra is an incredible designer, and he's really passionate about this work, and he's gifted all his time as well for the well-being of it. So a good brother here is, I gave Dex the opportunity to change the cover and go anywhere he wanted. And funny enough, he came back to the same image as well to represent it. So we've got that. I love that little dynamic with a little heart, if you notice in the A, like just that little hint of that's the realm that we're operating in. There's that dynamism of that red colour, that very bright heart evolved. We're not shy. We're being bold about the message here. It's no longer serves us to quietly sort of tuck away. There's the boss there, the president in the middle. And honour those men intimately and well. There's some of the exhibitions, there's the award. There's some of the kind of intentionality behind it. If you just read the titles, there is quite a strong code of values and ethics that Tasman operates. Inclusion, there's non-political, religious, authenticity, responsibility, accountability, non-judgment, peace, generosity, gratitude, kindness. They're all things that all of us can benefit from having more of and being more present with in our lives. There's a few of the exhibitions. That was a wonderful one on the right there of the 3 months we had in the QMAG Museum. Incredible space. So that's the filmmaker on the top right, Troy Melville, and he actually just popped out to redesign one of the videos for us just literally last week. There's the opening of one of the Bernie exhibitions. And we had this funny, quite quirky way of presenting the first exhibition. We had a space where you weren't allowed to put anything on the walls. But it was an incredible, central, beautiful, powerful, evocative space to be in. So we had to come up with something independent that sat in the middle to be able to hold the images. And we undernoted quite a bit, didn't we, Anthony? And we wanted something that still had a see-through aspect so it didn't shut down your view between the space. And we actually chose these really hardcore, like business site fences that people use. So it's this real blokey kind of, metal fence aspect to it. But it actually worked really well. And flicking through, you can see how the words of the man are included, the name of the man who's chosen to spoke to the image, and then we're building up slowly the conversations of yourselves and the people that have walked past and been part of it. And so that's going to build and be part of the whole sort of body of work as you go through. So this will be turned into an ebook. We're trying to decide whether we use this as a funding mechanism, because we do need to get some more funding if it needs to travel. If you know any rich patrons, feel free to look us up. There's a couple out there actually that we're already talking to, so hopefully things will come. But, you know, this probably means a lot more to you now that you've heard a lot of the story behind some of the images. And I love that kind of ownership, you know, of the naming and the connection with the photograph. It's real and tangible, and it's about one man. Little pause moments in design. We have a full image that just speaks by itself. Going back to the mask process, we actually had some of the masks traveling with that photograph, and we put them up there around it in some of the other exhibitions. But so you get the idea. And then right now, the ends. We started creating sort of the resource page for where to be. And of course, the original design was all Tasmanian, and we were just talking about it last night and this morning. Well, you know, why not use it as a resource opportunity for all the work that's happening in Australia? So we need to now go back and speak to the right people who have access and knowledge about all that's happening around nationally to create a body of work or a reference point for all that's happening out there. So one thing we can do also is to create a link to the video and the storytelling of that man in the photograph that we can link into an ebook. So that's going to be a wonderful thing to do. I might end up doing a QR code thing where it links into, you know, a verbal conversation like you've had about some of the images. And we're just exploring the potential, I guess, of contemporary ways of exhibiting work. So here we've got, you know, all the working Tasmanian men's groups, you know, how to organise connecting with Tasman, things like the Black Dog Institute and Headspace and all the different kind of major organisations that are working with wellbeing of men. So big thanks to Dex, and excited to where that's go next. Take it a breath. Thank you for your time today and your attention and your presence. And it's been wonderful to see the look in people's eyes and the body language and some of the stories and all that kind of thing. I'm going to officially say thank you to YouTube and all the people that have been connecting live and online. I hope that's been insightful. Please feel free to reach out. Tasman.org is the main reference point for what we're doing in Tasmania and where we'd want to direct you towards in terms of following up on this project and where to from here. I put my personal email in there because I'm really happy to be that reference point as well. And again, please feel free to reach out and share your ideas or energy or intentions or connections or possibilities about where it could go from here. I can make a big sigh.
Well done, Paul.
Anthony.
Just a few words I wanted to share. I've been lucky enough to be one of the curators of the exhibition, so I've been travelling around Tasmania and now here, and it's been every time I get to open the exhibition up, I open up the box and I take out these amazing pictures, and they really gives me a buzz. And I think just hearing Paul talk about that journey that we've been on with this exhibition and the men in this exhibition, it's just been fantastic for me to rehear that. So thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for sharing part of your life story. I think it's been interesting as well, and the connections that you have to these images and how the people have affected you in your own life. I think the important thing, I think it shows the importance of storytelling, and storytelling can be through a photo. It can be through photo and words. It can be through the video. So I think that is something that really connects people and has always done so for centuries, that story that you tell. I'd like to acknowledge the courage of the men in the photos for their words, their vulnerability, and being prepared to share this across the world in a way as they can be today. We won an award for, it was called the Better Milk Award, which is rather unusual, isn't it? But in the speech, when I was thanking them for presenting this award, I said that it really did connect with us because we want to be better fathers, better partners, better sons, and better men. And so it did link in with that award. So I thought that was that really got our message across. I've just been going into Latin as well, just having a look after that first talk, well, the first bit I mentioned to you where it says, Audi vide tasse, which was here, see, hold your tongue. And I've come up with a new one. Audi vide esse vulnerabilis locudi, which could possibly mean hear, see, be vulnerable and speak out. And I think that's really that's the message we're trying to get with this. It won't fit, unfortunately, on the building outside, but I think it's the message that we would like to get out. We have developed a hut home here with the South Melbourne Photography Club. It's been just wonderful. It's just opened their arms to us and supported us, brought us in here, helped us put up the display. It's been fantastic. So thank you very much for the club. A round of applause there. But in particular, Paul, thank you for sharing your vision and sharing these amazing pictures and the words that you accompany with that. I'd like to also thank YouTube for enabling us to record this, and it'll be travelling wherever YouTube goes, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, YouTube. And I think it's turned off now. Good. Thank you, YouTube. Okay, Paul's a